Hi everyone, I'm Anthony O'Flynn. The road to official disclosure of the UFO phenomenon has taken a significant step forward with the hearings in Congress last week in the US, with an official whistleblower coming forward and giving his testimony, even in a limited capacity, of the reality of the UFO phenomenon. And the evidence that he has put forward is that the US government, the US military, is in possession of crashed UFOs and has a UFO retrieval program, and is also in possession of ET bodies, which he used the term biologics, which is effectively giving meaning to the possession of the pilots' bodies of these craft. Now, this is a big story to unpack. If this phenomenon is new to you, then it's time to start to catch up to the reality that the US government is officially and perhaps unofficially chartering a course now for UFO disclosure, for official UFO disclosure, and obviously as a byproduct of that, the disclosure of the ET phenomenon as well. Now, it's created a lot of debate. The program itself, the way the disclosure is taking place is drip-fed. It is what's often referred to as soft disclosure, where the real evidence, the hard evidence, the game-changing evidence, the irrefutable evidence is not being disclosed to the public. It hasn't been released yet, but that doesn't mean it's going to be. And I think that the way to look at this is that it is a process, and it appears that there is a definite initiative. Where it's coming from is very difficult to say, whether it's the Pentagon, the Department of Defense. It's definitely not the politicians, that's for sure. One thing, I've watched a lot of the footage from these hearings from last week, and one thing becomes very clear is that the politicians overall, obviously not all of them, they really don't have a lot of idea about what is really going on in some of these military bases, in these secret facilities, and they don't have clearance and access to this information. So really, that is one thing clear from watching this testimony, this evidence, is that the types of questions that the politicians are asking, they're very limited in nature, and it's all too easy to go and criticize this soft disclosure, these hearings, but there really hasn't been anything like this ever before in the history of the US Parliament, except for in 1968 there was a symposium. So this was obviously over 50 years ago that this topic was addressed properly in the US Congress, and this hearing shows that there is now official information coming out that's very limited in nature, very limited in scope, but is revealing to the general public this phenomenon. Now, this testimony was picked up by some of the mainstream media channels in the US, but the overall information by the mainstream media to cover this topic is still quite limited. So it's all too easy also to jump on the bandwagon of saying this is a psyop. I'll just give you my views on how I see these things and what I make of this. What's significant, obviously, is what's not being said. But the thing to understand is this whistleblower, as he's referred to, David Grush, that's coming forward, who is actually former US Air Force, is that he's signed a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, and he makes repeated reference to the fact that he can go into some of these details in this data deeply in a closed environment, not in the actual public testimony, for the record. So because of that, he is unable, or unwilling at least, to basically be a whistleblower of the nature that perhaps the public wants, who are interested in this phenomenon, which of course is a big point in my view, because he has gone through the official channels where he has basically become a whistleblower through these official channels that do exist. Personally, I don't classify his testimony as being that of a whistleblower, because it's completely managed, it's completely contained, and it's completely sanctioned in terms of the requirements of the Department of Defense. So this means that the argument that it is orchestrated, it is scripted, it is managed, in my view, is significant, but I don't consider it to be a psyop in the way that most people would just have this knee-jerk reaction in this truther community, which has a lot of maturing and growing up to do, particularly in the field of the UFO reality, because there's a lot of people out there who are, talking about truth and being a truther and this kind of thing these days. Well, in my view, the linchpin for the entire paradigm shift revolves and centers around our place in the galaxy, our place in the universe, and the relationship that we have to extraterrestrials and the craft that they're using to navigate into this solar system and wherever they're going and whatever dimensional reality they are coming from and returning to. So the statements and the evidence that was given can be downplayed. It perhaps wasn't anything new to the people who were interested in this phenomenon and these topics. However, that is a little cynical attitude. Actually, it's a little bit too cynical. And people are wanting black and white statements. Is this psyop? Is this disclosure? And so on. Particularly in regard to the UFO phenomenon, it's very nuanced. It's not clear. And to draw conclusions, they are often subjective, not objective. And it's important to know when we are making subjective statements. So when I'm expressing now that I don't consider this to be a psyop, it's a subjective statement. I don't know that objectively. Is it managed? Yes, I consider it to be managed, but again, that's a subjective statement, and subjective statements are prone to error. But what we do know is that because this is in official capacity, it is a big step forward, and the real information that people are wanting to know about will probably not be available for some time. However, I'll make the statement now that I consider there to be official announcement and official disclosure, depending how you define it, within the next 2 years. It's probable that this will occur around sometime in the next 2 years. It could be sooner. And there are also arguments that disclosure has already taken place with some of the footage that's been released by the Department of Defense that is actually been in the mainstream media that shows the objects are unidentified. So what does that mean depending how you define disclosure? So I'm looking at that time frame of it could happen sooner, but it's going to be quite a long journey. But it seems that the decision has already been made to start to release this information. So my view of David Grush's testimony is it is genuine. He believes it's genuine. But as he says in his testimony, he has not seen any of these biologics, these bodies himself, and he has not seen the craft himself. He is relying on testimony from other people. So he is the perfect candidate to be the frontman for disclosure from the perspective that he is not the person who is really having the knowledge and the details of the bodies, the craft, the reverse engineering programs, the propulsion systems, the technology that exists. He's basically been working with 40 people over the last 4 years to come to this place where he's at now. But it appears that he is genuine in his efforts, but it's likely that it's coming from a sanction from a managed place, even though he claims in his testimony that he has suffered professional and personal repercussions from his stance on this topic. So as I said, it's a very complicated, very murky, very difficult to decipher phenomenon, particularly with the involvement of clandestine agencies with clandestine interests that are not transparent in any way whatsoever. Having said that though, it was another point that came through the testimony was actually the mention and the alluding to the corporations that are involved in this And it appeared to me that there is a lot more to be spoken about as far as the corporations that are involved in this and the contracts that are involved with the government, because the issue related to that came up in this testimony was the taxpayer money that's been spent on these projects, which the public does not have access to. And in fact, one of the politicians said that the Pentagon is audited every year and that they are out by $1 billion when they do the audit. I mean, to think that $1 billion goes missing from a budget of an organisation like that every year is quite staggering. $1 billion is an incredible amount of money. So these are some of the details that I took in from this testimony, from the hearing. Also, the idea that there's a factional battle within the department itself. I can imagine that this is also something of manufactured, something orchestrated. I mean, why would you trust the mainstream media now after all the lies that they've told? Having said that, though, this is not something coming from the mainstream media. This was a direct testimony. Why will we trust the Pentagon, the US Department of Defense? You know, that speaks for itself. So it's this idea of factional war. It's straight out of the Jason Bourne playbook, where the viewer is led down the subtext of there's good people in the CIA, there's bad people in the CIA, but there's a lot of good people trying to do the right thing, and this kind of management of this topic. So it's difficult to draw conclusions, but it's clear that there is a step forward. And what's notable about this as well is that this testimony wasn't just by David Grush, it was also by David Fravor and Ryan Graves of the US Navy. They actually gave their testimony of what they have experienced, and they basically have their own experiences. Fravor was the lead pilot of the 2004 USS Nimitz, which was a Tic Tac UFO encounter off the coast of California. And UFOs were apparently traveling at 10,000 miles per hour. And also, Ryan Graves also said that the speed of the craft was up to like just under 2 Mach, something like that, which is incredibly fast. And he actually also gave testimony that the craft themselves were a grey cube inside a clear sphere. So this is giving even more detail. And he also said that his encounters in 2014 and 2015, when he was in the USS Roosevelt flying off the east coast of the US, that they had daily encounters for 9 months. So that basically works out at about 200 different encounters, the pilots there. What was also revealed in the testimony, that there was a culture of not discussing this if you didn't want your career to be impacted in a negative way, and just to keep quiet about it. Again, it's difficult to evaluate what that really means as far as the operations and the debriefing, as far as the observation of the craft and so on. One of the pilots did consider that this was a threat to the national security of the US because of the technology that these UFOs had. And you know, the idea that they have 2 pilots is basically giving very concrete, tangible evidence from careerists in the US military who are respected, recognized, and taken seriously. So it's difficult to draw concrete conclusions, obviously, from this hearing, but we obviously are charting a course towards genuine disclosure now of this phenomenon. What that really means is difficult to assess, but this is part of the greater agenda, in my view, the greater globalist agenda, and this is a critical piece of the jigsaw that really involves this linchpin of this interaction of the ETs with humans, even if it's simply in this context, limited context of the Air Force interacting with the craft, but it's still going on and it's still talked about. And it was also revealed that it was estimated that about 95% of these sightings are not reported, or anything's gone any further with the information. So it depends on your point of view, how you really want to look at this information as to how serious to take it. We're not going to go from the admission of some kind of unidentified craft in the sky to the depths of the whole phenomenon in one or two hearings. This is going to be a very long drawn out disclosure that will probably go on. They'll never reveal the true information in the full context of what is known about alien life and the phenomenon of UFOs, the back engineering, the advanced technology that's not released to the public, because that's not really what the agenda is. At this point, the agenda is to get everyone on board with the idea that there are ETs, UFOs do exist. We're not alone in the universe, but for many people who've been following this phenomenon, it's a disappointment that this is coming out, this information is so limited. But having said that, one other outcome of the hearing was that there should be some system put in place for the accumulation of this data for both commercial and military pilots, so that there can be some sort of collection of data, like a nexus point for all the information to collate and to work out things in much more greater detail. But again, this information, there are people who do have access to this information. It's just that if you're a pilot and you've seen this phenomenon, or you're standing on the ground in your backyard and you've seen this phenomenon, it's very limited as to what you personally understand from this. So it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to take in. It's basically going forwards, and it seems that this guy David Grush, he is sincere about his efforts to get the information out to the public. However, there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of hurdles, and there's a lot of other people that need to come before Congress who are operating in the background. But I think it's a long way from that happening. But in a positive context, there is definitely a push from within the government to start to give credible, irrefutable evidence and shift this whole narrative of the UFO phenomenon, because people do not really underestimate the shift in human consciousness that will occur when it is irrefutable that ET life exists and we're not alone in the universe. This will actually open many doorways in the human mind to accelerate this paradigm shift and connect us to our galactic origins and our galactic heritage and our place in the galaxy, which is beyond this extremely primitive idea of just thinking that we're alone in the universe and there's no one else but us. And this will elevate the human consciousness in a lot of unforeseeable ways, but will tend to have a very spiritual effect on people, in the sense they'll be open to metaphysics more, open to more cosmic topics, and will basically create something of a spiritual awakening for the whole of humanity. It will shift because of this information when it is finally irrefutably released, which no way to tell when that will be, but we're definitely heading towards that process. We're in that process at the moment. So that's everything for now. Stay tuned for more. There's going to be plenty more about this topic coming out across this decade. And in conclusion, I'll just say that it is, and some people would argue and I'd agree, that it is disempowering for people to simply only believe in the UFOs or the government, or UFOs because the government says it's okay to believe in them, and that it's disempowering because our belief systems and our own self-awareness is then hinged and dependent on an external source, and the external source being the government. So that's another theme altogether, but it's still going to have an impact on the collective consciousness of this planet in a lot of very, very profound ways. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.